risk?
Because of where it is, mainly, because it is sitting next to the Houses of Parliament, because the Houses of Parliament are a building which is a magnet for terrorists, and there have been a number of terrorist events there and nearby, and because in the current situation, building a Holocaust memorial centre there would increase the risk of terrorism near to and on the parliamentary estate and at that centre. I'm very much in favour of having a Holocaust memorial and education centre. I'm the child of Holocaust survivors. My grandparents died in a concentration camp. My sister's mother, birth mother, died in Auschwitz. So I need no persuading that we want a Holocaust centre, but it should be somewhere where it is much bigger, more free to access, with better security, a bespoke site within a reasonable distance of central London. But Victoria Tower Gardens, in my view, is a dangerous place to put it. I was independent reviewer of terrorism legislation from 2001 to 2011. I've kept a close interest in such matters ever since. And it is my view, and I gave this as evidence to the relevant select committee a few days ago, that this is the wrong place for it.
I look out the window and I can literally see it across the street. So it is quite an open space. It's on the banks of the Thames, but also just a few yards further up, there are police officers who are bristling with firepower, guns and the like. So the counter to that, I suppose, could be that it does need a lot of security, sadly, at this time in our history. But there's a lot of security on its doorstep.
Yes, but if you walk across the street into Victoria Tower Gardens from your studio, you walk in uninterrupted by any security. There are no inspections going into there. And rightly so, because there's a playground there, there's the great Rodin statue, there's the Burghers of Calais, which brings tourists in large numbers. It's one of the finest artifacts in London. But if this memorial is built there... Am I right in saying? Sorry?
I think Emily Pankhurst there as well. I think I'm right in saying.
Emily Pankhurst is there as well. Thank you for reminding me of that. A very important statue and presence. And if this particular memorial centre is put into Victoria Tower Gardens, I'm afraid that that free access which you and I enjoy into those pleasant gardens will come to an end, because everybody who goes into that place, into those gardens, will have to be securitized in some way. Also, the proximity of the river, which is but yards away, is another security risk, and the police would have to secure the river boundary of the gardens as well. It's just a bad choice of site on security grounds. I'm absolutely with the government that we should build such a centre, but they should go and look at, for example, the Polin Centre in Warsaw in Poland, which is an absolutely magnificent new build on a good open site. And of course it has lots of security, but it fulfills the requirement of such a place, that it should be, that the impression and message it should leave is one of educated, analytical and calm revulsion.
I have been to the Holocaust Memorial in Israel, and that's certainly one has to,
yes.
Yes, indeed. Who should pay for any such memorial here in the UK, do you think?
Well, the government has offered to pay, and I think it is appropriate that the government should pay, but that's not an absolute given, and there will be such a memorial centre. There are plenty of people who have particular personal reasons for wanting it, who would contribute to it, but the government generously has agreed to pay. The only difference with the government is that they've got a fixed idea on what has become an inappropriate site.
Before I let you go, Lord Carlile, thank you for taking the time this morning to speak to us on The Breakfast Show. Just, I wondered if you could tell us a little more about your story. Your mother, I believe, and her cousin came from Poland.
My mother was in Poland throughout World War II. Her first husband, not my father, who was a young neurologist, died by her side, having been shot by a German soldier in the Warsaw Uprising of 1944. My father left Poland and came to the United Kingdom as a reserve Polish medical officer in 1940, leaving behind his wife, his daughter Renata, his parents, his sister, her family. They all died apart from his daughter Renata, who was miraculously saved and hidden throughout the war by a young woman who later became my mother and wrote a very good book about it. My sister wrote a very good book about it. And, you know, this is part of my history, and many other people in this country have similar histories. And we feel extremely strongly that that message of educated, analytical, and calm revulsion about the Holocaust should be out there for everyone to see. But it needs to be in a much bigger centre in any event than the one that was proposed, much of which would be underground. You mentioned Yad Vashem, the memorial in Israel. It is the most wonderful sight. It is the most remarkable celebration of something dreadful that you could ever see. But the reason it works is not because it's because it's not squeezed into a basement site, but is on its own park. The Warsaw Centre, which I mentioned a few moments ago, is also on a very good separate site. And such sites leave the opportunity to have very modern, very carefully organised and actually quite discreet security.
OK. My lord, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for taking the time.
And you.
Quick look at the front pages for you this morning, Amanda.
Yes, absolutely. So a lot of coverage of what we were talking about yesterday, this suggestion from the outgoing head of the British Army, General Sir Patrick Saunders, that basically we need a much bigger army because we might have to face a war with Russia in the next 20 years or so, and suggesting that possibly there needs to be widespread mobilisation, more civilians prepared to fight.
Exactly. Let's have a look at what else we've got coming up. In the Times, UK should have citizen army to see off Russia. Looking at the Times as well, PM forced to rule out army. Oh, they all ran with it, didn't they?
They did, yeah.
A picture of these two, front page of The Guardian, anger at PM's social homes for British workers. We'll be asking Labour about that coming up. And also the Daily Mail first-class fiasco. That was a story that we covered as well yesterday.
Indeed, not gone down very well with the Daily Mail there. And indeed, with the government, sounds like the Prime Minister's not terribly keen on it, though they are saying they'll support the consultation going ahead. OK,
have we got any more? The Express, there you go. You will deliver, PM vows. No Royal Mail cutbacks. Let's wait and see. They're losing an absolute fortune at the moment, and that is the lead on the eye as well. Post Office new second IT system had faults but prosecuted staff. Anyway, it's a slightly different
Yes,
story
a whole
there.
different earlier IT system also had big problems.
Oh, goodness me. Let us know your thoughts. Now, a storm in a teacup. We love this, don't we? Tea-making methods have caused quite a stir between the UK and the US.
I like a nice cup of tea with my dinner, and a nice cup of tea with my tea. And when it's time for bed, there's a lot to be said for a nice cup of tea.
OK, well, American scientists suggested a pinch of salt in tea might make an overbrewed cuppa tastier. Then the Americans said microwaving water for the tea was better than the kettle. Outrage ensued, and diplomats decided it was time to calm the brewing storm. I know, sorry. In a statement, the embassy said this: "We want to assure the good people of the UK that the unthinkable notion of adding salt to Britain's national drink is not official United States policy and never will be. The US Embassy will continue to make tea in the proper way by microwaving it." I know. And the UK Cabinet Office replied to that, saying, "We appreciate our special relationship. However, we must disagree wholeheartedly. Tea can only be made using a kettle or a cooker." I have a cooker at home. Do you?
Oh, no, but they do sound amazing.
Yes, yeah, it's very good. You don't have to
tap.
then boil the kettle. Are you a tea drinker?
I'm a tea drinker, but I am a heathen because I have my tea black with the bag left in. So the US scientist, I think, is directly trying to target me and me alone for... But also, I don't think that they took into account how hard London's water is. There is enough salts and ions and limescale in it already.
I just thought that, apparently. If you put lemon in the tea, according to this scientist, this professor, it removes the scum. Scum?
Oh.
Scum?
Oh, scurrilous accusations against our tea.
Beg your pardon. Do you put in the milk before or after?
Well, if I'm making it with a teapot, which I would advocate to this scientist is the much better way to make tea than just a microwave or indeed just a kettle, then I would put the milk in first, yeah. I think... But you know how much to put in, because it's the same every time.
Amanda,
No.
you're a wrong un.
Yeah.
Absolute wrong un.
No, well, anyway, that's... But if I'm making just a cup, then I'd do it the other way around.
Do you use loose leaf?
No, because I get stuck in my teeth. I'm not very good at using them. Yeah, that is a step too
what the
far for me.
strain is.
I know. But I drink so much tea. Obviously, I'm pregnant at the moment, so I'm having to have a lot of decaf, which was a struggle for me. But, yeah.
I took one of our American friends from across the water there to the Wolseley for tea.
Oh, very
the other day,
nice.
where they do loose leaf tea. And there was the contraption, I don't know if you've seen it, where you have to... It has the little bucket at the bottom and then the strainer on the top, and you have to tip it to one side to pour the tea. Then you put it back, so if there's any drips, it goes into the thing. I had to show them how to use it. You know who you are. We'd like your thoughts on this too. And your stories, get in touch by scanning the QR code on your screen in just a second, or by contacting us directly on social media at Kay Burley, at Gareth Barlow.
At Amanda Acast.
There you go, that's easy, isn't it? We'll see you in just a second. Talking about Boeing. Talking to Wilf, actually, about Boeing and the day ahead, including a mixed bag for Boeing in the latest rulings from America's aviation regulator. And forget jet setting, set jetting is the travel craze that's taking off. We'll tell you more about that.
Well, he's an English toy terrier and he's a rehome, so he is actually 12. I've only had him for 10 years.
Only.
And he is a great little character.
Is he well behaved?
He is very well behaved. It's a complete myth that you can't train an old dog new tricks. It may take a little bit longer, but all dogs are really receptive to learning. We have to understand dogs are super intelligent. They're complex, they're sentient beings. And I think many, of the puppies purchased during the pandemic, I felt terribly sorry for them because it's not their fault they're being a bit badly behaved. They didn't really have the opportunity to be socialised, to go to puppy training classes. And some of the owners may not have had a dog before. It wasn't totally the dog's fault that now 97% of these owners are still, experiencing lots of bad behaviours, from pulling on the lead to excessive barking to jumping up. And of course, over a third are suffering from separation anxiety due to the fact, everyone was together for such a long time. And so one of the shocking statistics from this research is that 80% of these owners are still using aversive training methods.
What does that mean?
That means shouting at your dog, pushing your dog away if they're jumping up. So you see, this is what one should do. This is called positive reinforcement, where you use food to reinforce a good behaviour, sitting on Kay Burley's knee, rather than shouting or, causing distress. Dogs are pre-programmed to love their owners. So, and they also have been proven to have emotional intelligence and episodic memory, once only thought possible for people. So if you keep hitting your dog is going to build resentment, and you're not doing anything to build your relationship. So just like with a relationship with a human, you have to work at it. It's every day. I worry that too many people actually think that dogs are little people in a furry suit. So messages are getting lost in translation. And anyone thinking of getting a dog, I say, look, do your research. And I also say, look, adopt, don't shop. Mr. Binks came into my life when he was 2. You can train older dogs new tricks. That's a myth that you can't.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Coming up, fancy a bit of set jetting? We'll speak to the Times head of travel, Claire Irvin. And Prince Edward meets an ancient family friend. But first, time to talk to Wilfred about what has caught his eye today. Wilfred, good morning. I'm guessing Boeing's going to be on your agenda. Good morning.
Good morning to you as well. I'm interested to hear what set jetting is, by the way, so I'll be watching through for that. But yeah, so the big news in the business world is that the FAA, the Federal Aviation Authority, has allowed Boeing to take to the air again with the 737 MAX 9 that's been grounded for about 20 days since that blowout on an Alaskan Airlines flight. That's obviously good news for Boeing. It's good news for the airlines that already have a lot of this aircraft, like United, like Alaska. But they've also said they're not allowed to ramp up the speed of production because of safety concerns. So that's bad news for airlines like Ryanair that are waiting for a lot of deliveries of this aircraft. And for some context, Kay, end of last year, they were producing 38 of these planes per month, and they were aiming to get it up to 55 to 60 by the middle of next year. So in that sense, it does feel like a little bit of a sort of slap on the wrist. It's not the end of the world for them on this plane, and it will be taken to the skies again soon.
I'm always surprised by how many planes they actually produce. I wouldn't have thought there was that much demand for so many aircraft, but obviously there is.
Well, if you ever look at those flight tracker websites, it's like there's an endless amount of planes all over America at any one point, let alone all around the globe. But yeah, Boeing has really suffered in the last couple of years. Airbus has taken a big lead because of the problems that Boeing's had, particularly with this family of aircraft, not the specific one, the 737 MAX family. And the drawdown for them on this is definitely less bad than those issues around 2018 and 2019. There was 2 fatal crashes then, of course, which was the big difference. I mean, the share price, just for context, since January the 5th, when it was grounded 20 days ago, it's only down 14%. It more than halved last time around. There's been no toppling of the CEO this time around, and there's not been that really damaging brand value issue that's taken them a long time to get back up to speed. And most importantly, of course, no fatalities.
OK, Wilfred, we'll see you at 10. For now, thanks very much indeed. Now, from jet setting to set jetting. Do you want to know more about it? What on earth is it? Claire is here. Hi, it's good to see you. Tell me what set jetting is, first of all.
Well, very simply, it's going on holiday somewhere you've seen on the telly.
Oh.
So you can see what they did there.
Oh,
you jet off to a set.
Like where?
Yes. Well, I mean, you know, just put a pin in the globe and you'll find somewhere. But anywhere from, particularly recently, White Lotus has been a big draw for people to travel to Hawaii and then Sicily. And, you know, there's a raft of new shows and films that will be inspiring similar. Argyle, all over the headlines this morning, and that's set in Greece. So we can expect to see lots of people wanting to go there too.
OK, Traitors as well. I think we can remind
Traitors.
people of Traitors.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Traitors is set in Andros, in Scottish Highlands.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, there's a little deception going on there where the viewers are concerned because the contestants don't actually stay in the castle, as you might think. They stay in a Marriott down the road, Inverness Airport. Not quite so glamorous. I'm sure very comfortable.
She adds quickly. Succession as well.
Yeah.
Everybody loves a bit of Succession.
Everybody loves a bit of Succession.
But it's particularly popular at the moment because in Norway.
Yeah.
Isn't that when they had that funky house?
Yes, really amazing. And I mean, that's the thing, I think, you know, television and film is filmed so aspirationally, everything looks so amazing. If the plot captures your imagination, then the location's very likely to as well. And, you know, it's very easy. I mean, it's the ultimate escapism, isn't it? It's not just getting away on holiday, but it's getting away in your mind as well. Although it's not always as it might seem.
I know. I know.
I was in Sicily this summer, which was incredible. The same hotel that White Lotus was filmed, but my plans to go to the beach didn't quite go to plan.
Because it's not near the beach, yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, that can happen. You need to check before you travel.
Yeah.
Happy Valley, though, I mean, that's not glamorous, but it's a popular place for people to
No,
go.
but it's gorgeous, and funnily enough, my first ever experience of set jetting was to Holmfirth, home of Last of the Summer Wine, which is very close to Hebden Bridge, where Happy Valley is set. And of course, Hebden Bridge itself is very cool now. You know, it's very hipster. It's also still very beautiful. You can see there. And, you know, with all that...
Scenery is beautiful, isn't it?
Scenery is absolutely gorgeous, and that Yorkshire hospitality as well, you can't beat it. I mean, you know, the UK is blessed with set jetting destinations, you know, all over is... I mean, Harry Potter was filmed all over the country. It's talking about...
including in Harrow on the Hill.
Was it?
Yes.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, one of the indoor scenes was actually in one of the Harrow school buildings.
There you go.
However, if you want to get a little bit more, Death in Paradise.
Death in Paradise,
in
Guadalupe.
Caribbean,
Yeah. So
is that a nice place to go?
it's beautiful.
I've never been, actually.
Yes, it's. I mean, surprisingly, still relatively unspoilt as well. It's not very touristy, if you like, very much real Caribbean. And every series of Death in Paradise, we see a huge spike in search for Guadalupe. And, you know, I think hopefully that's really helped that island and its and the tourism that supports it.
OK. Now, which areas do you think are going to be popular going forward this year? I'm looking at a list that you've given us. Thailand, Paris, the Highlands, London, on it goes.
Yeah, it goes on and on. I've mentioned Greece for Argyle. We just talked about Guadalupe. Although, again, Emily in Paris, there's a big TikTok trend for somebody who'd gone to Paris because they wanted to be Emily and it wasn't as they thought. But yeah, we've got Malta, inspired by the new Gladiator 2 film, Korea, Squid Games. I mean, if you really want to take your set jetting.
Squid Games.
Are you?
Yeah.
Could we see you in Korea? No, I haven't. Cultural black hole, I'm afraid.
Oh, really? You really should. It's very bloodthirsty, though. Don't watch it with the kids.
Right, OK, I won't. But Australia, of course, is back on screen. South Australia for The Tourist. If you're watching series 2 of that.
Have you seen that?
I saw the first one.
Oh, but you've not seen the second one. We can't be friends if you don't up your game.
That slightly annoyed me by the end of that. I mean, he's still forgotten who he is, hasn't he?
But the second one is based in Ireland.
Right.
And it's got... I'm not going to spoil it for you, but you
OK.
must watch it. The second
I shall
one
watch
is
it.
much
I shall
better.
start tonight.
The second one is much better. Your top 3 places to go this year?
Top 3 places.
Where to go yet.
Oh, right. Well, I'm headed back to Palm Springs. It's my new favourite. And that, actually, I'll come back and talk about that next week.
Oh,
but
do.
that's art-inspired. Huge art scene there and cocktails. What's not to love?
Exactly.
And what else for this year? I mean, we've just been through the main list.
Yeah.
I mean, this is such a big trend
Bhutan, I fancy.
Bhutan, yeah. I mean,
It's good walking, isn't it, Bhutan?
Yes, and they're improving things for tourists day by day. There's just been another announcement about tourist taxes there, so it's an ever-improving picture for tourists.
OK, so set jetting is the way forward.
Yeah.
We might give that a go. It's good to see you, as
Great
always,
to see
Claire.
you.
Thanks very much indeed. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Day looking like another unsettled day, but hopefully tomorrow will be drier and brighter. This morning it's mild and grey for most places, plenty of patchy rain around, cold in the far northeast and seeing a little snow over the higher ground in Scotland.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Let's talk about Jonathan the tortoise. Is he 191? Is he 192? Who knows? But certainly he's an old boy and he's seen a lot of the royals.
He absolutely has. I mean, he was born in the reign of William IV. I don't think he saw him. But, yeah, certainly he saw the Queen Mother, George VI. I mean, he's really seen a lot of the world, hasn't he?
He certainly has.
He's huge. Look at the size of him as well. He's absolutely massive.
No, don't get cocky because he's not here to defend himself.
I know. It's plauditory. It's plauditory rather than anything else. He's remarkable.
He's outlived 7 monarchs. My favourite story about tortoises is, if you're old enough to remember Blue Peter, 1967. We all thought it was Fred. And then when Fred came out of hibernation, we had to put an A on the end of his skin. Hello, everybody. A very good morning. It's 8 o'clock. Coming up on today's programme for you, the American prisoner just hours away from the first ever execution by nitrogen.
Plus, we'll tell you about the diplomatic row that is brewing between the Cabinet Office and the US Embassy.
There's a bit of a pun in there. And
We've just heard from the Foreign Secretary, and I'll tell you what he said shortly.
looking forward to that. Thursday, 25th of January. This is the second time that Alabama has tried to execute convicted killer Kenneth Eugene Smith. Foreign Secretary decries what he calls unimaginable suffering in Gaza as he arrives in Qatar for talks involving Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
It's time for an immediate pause in the fighting, because we've got to not only get the aid in, but crucially, we've got to get those hostages out.
We report from the Ukrainian school where children say they try to hide under their toys during rocket attacks. Cleared to fly after a door blew out in midair, the US says it will allow Boeing 737 MAX 9 jets to take off again once checks are completed. Plus, nearly 200 years and counting, Prince Edward meets a tortoise that has outlived 7 monarchs.
I like a nice cup of tea with my dinner, and a nice cup of tea with my tea.
And a storm in a teacup, how making the perfect cuppa brewed up an international storm.
Cup of tea.
Morning, welcome to the Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Shimon is here with me to talk about the death sentence in Alabama, and it has been in place for a considerable amount of time, but there's a twist today.
Today there is a twist, yes. Kenneth Smith will be facing the death penalty for the second time, or facing execution for the second time. The first attempt was back in November 2022, when they were going to use the lethal injection, which is what's usually used in these executions. However, after multiple failed attempts at finding Kenneth Smith's veins, eventually they did give up. Since then, Kenneth Smith's lawyers have been arguing to the US Supreme Court that they shouldn't attempt a second execution. Supreme Court have basically rejected halting the execution, which is due to take place at UK time. What's different this time, though, is that they will be using nitrogen gas if this goes ahead. So effectively, he'll be forced to wear a face mask, which is attached to a cylinder which has nitrogen in, and he will have to breathe this gas in until
Consciously
he dies.
do that.
Consciously do that.
I mean, Amnesty and others completely up in arms about it, not least the UN High Commission. This is what they said.
We are alarmed by the imminent execution in the United States of America of Kenneth Eugene Smith through the use of a novel and untested method, suffocation by nitrogen gas. This could amount to torture or other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment under international human rights law. Nitrogen gas has never been used in the United States to execute human beings. The American Veterinary Medical Association recommends giving even large animals a sedative when being euthanized in this manner, while Alabama's protocol for execution by nitrogen asphyxiation makes no provision for sedation of human beings prior to execution.
UN High Commission things. I mean, we have to point out that this guy is not a good guy.
No, he was convicted back in 1988 for murdering Elizabeth Sennett. He was actually one of 2 men that were hired as hitmen to murder her. They were hired by her husband at the time, Christopher. Now, he later took his own life, and the accomplice that murdered Elizabeth along with Kenneth Smith.
This is Elizabeth,
yes,
45 at the time.
Yeah, the accomplice was actually executed back in 2010. However, obviously with the case of Kenneth Smith, it has been more complicated. It is also interesting to touch upon what the UN was saying. Part of the reason why it's thought that nitrogen gas is being used rather than the lethal injection is because it has been difficult for US states where the execution applies to be able to get their hands on the drug that the lethal injection uses. This is because drug companies around the world have boycotted the buying of this drug as they don't agree with its use.
OK, so it looks as though he will be committed to death by breathing in nitrogen, and that is this evening. just looking at the list, Gareth, of the states, 27 states that actually agree to the death penalty. This guy's been on death row since 1996. 165 people on death row at the moment in Alabama.
Yes, and 195 people have had their death penalties commuted because they've actually been found to be wrongly convicted, you know, over the course of the years. And I think we also need to acknowledge the massive racial disparity and bias in the executions and the death penalty when it's imposed in the US. Black people massively outweighed when it comes to the percentage of people that are sentenced to death compared to the population percentage. And, you know, you look at a 2019 poll from Gallup, they suggested that 60% of American populations would prefer to see life without parole, 36% the death penalty. So opinions are shifting.
Yeah, looking at the list, China, top of death row, death penalties, Iran, Saudi Arabia, US also on that list.
Yeah, it's you know, many people would say a dire list to be part of and not befitting of the United States considering its role in the world. Well, let's look at some of the day's other news, shall we? Because in Ukraine, the trauma of the last 2 years has scarred the country, undoubtedly. The city of Kherson has been invaded, occupied and then liberated. But there's still little freedom, and children are among those most affected. Deborah Haynes reports from eastern Ukraine.
When rockets fall, I try to hide my head under my toys.
Illustrating Ukraine's lost childhood, hopes and dreams framed by war. Invading Russian soldiers drown in a river in the frontline city of Kherson. Ivan says his favourite drawing is of a tank. The 6-year-old already wants to become a soldier and says Russia is bad.
They are destroying Ukraine, and I know how to destroy them.
Heavy thoughts for such young minds. Schools in Kherson are shut, but a charity uses this classroom for speech therapy to try to reduce the damage of almost 2 years of war. A growing number of children have trouble speaking. Some no longer talk at all, terrorised by the fighting and with little chance to socialise. This is the soundtrack for Ukraine's children. Air raid sirens and artillery. Despite the danger, some hobbies are just too important to surrender. The training is also a welcome relief from being stuck at home.
I love to train. Football is my life. My dream is I want my friends to come back, for the war to be over and for all these Russians never to exist.
A shared goal, perhaps, for so many children who've already lost so much. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Kherson.
Meanwhile, Ukraine has accused Russia of playing with the lives of Ukrainian prisoners of war after a Russian military plane was shot down near the country's border, killing all people on board. Moscow says 65 Ukrainian soldiers on their way to a prisoner exchange were on board the aircraft and accused Ukraine of shooting it down. Ukraine hasn't confirmed that it was responsible, but says Russia shouldn't be putting prisoners of war on planes that are likely to be targeted.
It's obvious that the Russians are messing with the lives of Ukrainian captives, the feelings of their relatives, and the emotions of our society. All clear facts must be established, given that the aircraft crashed on Russian territory beyond our control.
6 bodies have been found in Southern California's Mojave Desert. Police haven't confirmed how they were killed, but a local TV station has reported that the scene is littered with bullet casings and that some of the victims appear to have been burned. 4 people have died after getting into trouble at an Australian beach. Rescuers in the southeastern state of Victoria say that it's the worst mass drowning there in 20 years. The beach on Phillip Island, southeast of Melbourne, was unpatrolled. The US aviation regulator has blocked Boeing from expanding production of its 737 MAX planes due to what it describes as unacceptable quality issues. 737 MAX 9 jets were grounded after a mid-air blowout during an Alaska Airlines flight earlier this month. In better news for Boeing, however, the FAA also announced that grounded planes can fly again once inspections are completed. Tougher knife legislation will be introduced to Parliament today, further cracking down on so-called zombie knives and machetes. They were banned in 2016, but the Home Secretary James Cleverly hopes the tighter measures will close loopholes which have allowed some sales to continue. Labour says the measures still don't go far enough. Shortly, we'll hear from the Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper. A 16-year-old footballer has been left paralysed after breaking his neck during a match. Declan McDonald, who plays for AC Rovers in Coatbridge, was taken to hospital following a collision with another player and has since undergone a 10-hour operation. A GoFundMe has raised more than £30,000 in just 24 hours.
Now, the Foreign Secretary has said he's told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that more aid must be allowed into Gaza, I should say, basically underlining what he's already said.
Yes, I don't think there's anything really new in what we're hearing from him on this trip that he's made to Israel and also to the West Bank, meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu as well as President Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority. But I think he really is trying to put the pressure on Israel. So he's been talking about the urgent need to address some of the bottlenecks in getting aid in terms of the fact that at the moment we're told that 9 out of 10 people in Gaza are living on less than one meal a day at the moment, really highlighting the unimaginable suffering, he says there. Also been talking to the Israelis about the need for a two-state solution, considering that Netanyahu had previously said he doesn't think that's going to work. That's adding to the pressure that, of course, we know the US also pushing on that as well. Also talking about the need for an immediate pause in the fighting. Once again, we've heard this before, but it really is, I think, just a sort of continuing diplomatic escalation of the pressure on Israel. But now he's going to Qatar, also talking about working with the Qataris to get more aid into Gaza as well. We're told UK aid has tripled to Gaza, but obviously with the bottlenecks actually getting it in and then around Gaza, I think that's really why his key message this morning has been about trying to get the Israelis to do more to help with that.
It's time for an immediate pause in the fighting, because we've got to not only get the aid in, but crucially, we've got to get those hostages out. And what I think we can do now is plan for how you turn that pause into a permanent, sustainable ceasefire without a return to fighting. That's what I was pushing on him, and that's what I'll be talking about here today. Now, for that to happen, a lot of things would have to happen. You'd have to see the Hamas leadership leave Gaza. You'd have to see the instruments of terrorism being dismantled in Gaza. But you've also got to see a political perspective so that Palestinian people can see that there is a route to having a Palestinian state, to having a new future. So it's all those things together that need to form part of a proper plan.
So he's in the region again. He's been there a lot. His air miles are racking up, aren't they? And he's underlining what he's already said. Is it going to make any difference?
Well, I think what we've been hearing from the government repeatedly is that this diplomatic process is what they need to be engaged in, that it is something that is an urgent priority. That's why he's been there travelling around the region, working with partners. We heard him speaking to various different committees about this is the strategy. It's a kind of trying to get regional partners to put more pressure on Israel, but also to work together to get the aid in. But obviously, for many others, it doesn't go far enough, because we know that many others believe that there should be a call for a ceasefire now.
OK. For now, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Meantime, let's talk to you about long COVID. Hundreds of doctors suffering with the effects are planning to sue the NHS. They say the health service failed to properly protect frontline workers. Shingi Maruriki spoke to one doctor who believes that she contracted COVID while caring for patients and nearly 4 years on is still struggling.
Breathless, violently shaking and visibly distressed. For Dr. Kelly Fernley, this was the reality of living with long COVID. She says she contracted the illness while working on a COVID ward. Nearly 4 years later, she's still struggling with its impact.
At one point, I didn't want to continue with life. Long COVID's impacted every area of my life. So it's not only affected my health, it's taken away my ability to work and earn a living. It's affected my long-term hopes and dreams for the future.
Because she's still housebound and worried about infection, Dr. Fernley spoke to us on Zoom. She is now part of a group of hundreds of doctors planning to sue the NHS for providing them with what the collective consider poor equipment on the front line.
I know several doctors who have been forced to sell their homes. Many would be homeless now, if not for the support of families. I know some doctors that are now having to use food banks. Many of these healthcare workers contracted COVID whilst providing care, vital care for patients.
Bond Turner, the law firm representing the group, claimed the NHS downgraded guidance in March 2020 for staff to only wear blue surgical face masks and plastic aprons, while both the NHS and the World Health Organization were only suggesting using FRSM, fluid-resistant surgical masks. Both the US and European public health authorities advise at least FFP3 or N95 masks for healthcare workers. The UK HSA said guidance was published which advised that FFP3 respirators be worn by healthcare in keeping with guidance published by the WHO, while the Department for Health and Social Care said throughout the pandemic the government acted to save lives and livelihoods, prevent the NHS being overwhelmed, and deliver a world-leading vaccine rollout which protected millions of lives across the nation. Meanwhile, experts say it's impossible to be certain about the origins of a COVID infection. For Dr. Fernley, there are still plenty of physical and emotional reminders. She traces back years of suffering to simply trying to do her job, protecting the public in the hardest of circumstances, which is why she feels more could have been done to protect people like her. Shingi Marike, Sky News.
Well, the impact of the pandemic on NHS staff will be one of the issues considered by the COVID inquiry. Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, gives evidence in Edinburgh this morning. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Today is looking like another unsettled day, but hopefully tomorrow will be drier and brighter. This morning it's mild and grey for most places with plenty of patchy rain around. Cold in the far northeast, we're seeing a little snow over the higher ground in Scotland, but that will turn to rain as the milder air continues to sweep in. During the morning, we'll see a few breaks develop in the clouds, so parts of central and eastern England might see a little sunshine.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, joining us this morning. Hello to you, Ms Cooper. It's always a pleasure to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. I know that you want to talk to us in more detail about zombie knives, and we've been chatting about that in the office this morning. What is Labour actually going to do to get these off the streets?
Well, we need a much stronger ban than the government is proposing. They've announced these proposals about 16 times before. 6 different Home Secretaries have said they'll get zombie knives off the street. We need a much broader ban, so it's got to include things like the ninja swords and other dangerous weapons as well. And there's got to be stronger penalties for the online marketplaces who are still profiting from the sale of illegal knives. We want a broader review that looks at the whole process of the way in which these knives are being bought. There's not proper checks for age as well. We've got to have stronger action. This is dangerous, and there's been a 70% increase in knife crime in the last 8 years. There's got to be action.
We will be hearing from a mum in just a few moments' time who lost her son to knife crime. Talking to her, when would you tell her, when would Labour be able to have these knives made illegal and off the streets?
Well, we would like the government to act even before the general election. We will support them to do so. We shouldn't be waiting for a general election. We would want to do so as swiftly as possible after a general election if Labour is elected. But we also see this as part of a wider action plan. Labour's setting out an action plan today on knife crime, which includes not just the action on the knife sales, but also action on gangs that are ending up dragging young people into crime. It includes stronger action, including mandatory referrals to youth offending teams for young people who are starting to get drawn into knife crime, and a major new youth prevention programme with community hubs, additional youth workers, mental health workers, that's based on some of the work that we did on Sure Start in the last Labour government, and applying that now to our teenagers to give them part of a better future, a new Young Futures programme to prevent knife crime as well.
How do you feel about concerns over terrorism risks at the planned Holocaust memorial for basically what is the back garden of the House of Commons, just across from where I'm sitting now?
Well, I strongly support the proposals for the new Holocaust memorial. So does the Labour Party. I think it's right that we have something that means that we can have future generations can learn. The survivors of the Holocaust now, there are many survivors, are very elderly. It's really important that we never forget the darkness into which Europe fell, the genocide that happened, and that we have that memorial and those lessons for the future. I think this is a good location for it. It's next to Parliament. It's next to the heart of our democracy. We have to stand firm against terror threats of all kinds. There are obviously ongoing concerns about all kinds of, whether that be counter-terror threats, whether that be other sorts of national security threats, that we have to have a firm response to wherever those threats take place.
And you would be content for it no longer to be a park that Londoners and tourists can enter without having to worry about security concerns?
Well, this is a programme that Labour supports, because I think you have to have a really iconic location and building in order to recognise the seriousness, the devastation that was caused by the Holocaust and the impact that it has had through the years and through the generations. So that's why this is something that we support and that the government strongly supports. I think this is a cross-party issue, to have everybody coming together supporting this and to make sure it can happen. It's been planned for a long time, and I really hope that people will come together and support this so that we could recognise that terrible chapter in history.
A thought that we're hearing, and a comment from you would be most helpful, please, Shadow Home Secretary. British homes should be for British workers. What do you make of reports that the government is looking at a scheme to give British citizens faster access to social housing?
Well, I think there's going to be a briefing report. I think we've seen those sorts of stories. They repeat them repeatedly, and they seem to be promising people homes that actually don't exist because they're not building the social housing that the nation needs. And also there are already restrictions and have been in place for a long time, not just for local residents, but also for people who are either British citizens who have long-term residence rights in this country. So it's not really clear what the government's saying. It looks like just more briefing and stories, just the same as they've done before, really.
Would you support a suggestion that British citizens should be top of the list?
Well, there are already provisions, in fact there have been for around 14 years, that mean that social housing providers can give priority to local residents, to those with a connection to the area, and there's already all sorts of restrictions in place, which means that social housing is for those who are British citizens and have long-term residence rights in the UK. So, I think this is one of those things, it's like one of those deliberate headline chasing stories that unfortunately the government does from time to time, really to distract from the fact that they're not actually building social housing that we need. They're not tackling the problems the country's facing, whether that is the rise in knife crime, whether that is the broken public services, the state of our National Health Service. We need a proper debate about the future of our country, a proper plan for the future of the country, rather than the chaos that we're just getting from the Conservatives at the moment.
It's freezing where you are. Is it cold in Milton Keynes this morning?
It's quite windy. It's nippy this morning. It is nippy, but it's quite windy. We're here in Milton Keynes because we're actually having a meeting with the police later on and with some of the youth organisations who are working to tackle knife crime about what more can be done, because we've got to get local organisations involved. You've got to get all those community groups working with the police, working with councils and agencies in order to tackle this. It's so serious.
OK, good to see you as always, Ms Cooper. Thanks for taking the time.
Good to see you, Kate.
Thank you. Thoughts? Morning.
Good morning. Well, that was interesting on the housing story, I
thought so, yeah.
So this is a report in The Guardian that the government is looking at this scheme that's being dubbed British Homes for British Workers to basically bump up British citizens on the social housing register. As Yvette Cooper rightly pointed out, we know there are millions of people waiting on that register. There isn't enough social housing at the moment anyway. But the way it's being reported is that this is really being positioned as part of the government's sort of fight back over concerns about the Rwanda bill not working, worries about immigration. And so it really is quite dividing Labour, you would think, in terms of setting out what is, a clear policy to be tough on migrants and effectively saying, well, actually, we're prioritising British people for these scarce housing resources. But actually, Yvette Cooper there didn't really want to be drawn into that. She just said, well, actually, already, there are restrictions. Already the rules suggest you have to have a local connection. And I think it was actually under Gordon Brown that those rules were brought in. And then there was a bit of controversy because people already suggested, well, this was a bit about trying to prioritise British people for homes. I mean, more broadly, I think the charities would argue, well, you need it for people with the greatest need. We need more housing. And they're concerned that actually it would be discriminatory and illegal to tighten those rules more closely. So is this just something that's kind of been a bit of a kite flown to kind of show the government's really tough on it? But interesting that Labour don't really want to be drawn into that.
Let's see. For now, thanks very much indeed, Amanda. Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News for you. The mother of a young knife crime victim, that's Dwayne Simpson, will join us with a fellow campaigner to tell us how they're fighting street violence. Ian King will tell us why the next government could struggle to pay for public services. Plus, nearly 200 years and counting, Prince Edward meets a tortoise that has outlived 7 monarchs.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors.
I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone. I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News, at the Old Bailey.
again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Coming up in a moment, two women with very personal stories about knife crime weigh in on efforts to tackle zombie knives. 8:45, we'll speak to an Oscar-nominated filmmaker. All of that to come. But first, our top story this morning is about Alabama. Kenneth Smith, he's 58 years old, and he's going to be gassed with nitrogen later on.
Yes, this is because Alabama has struggled to get hold of the chemicals that are normally used for the lethal injection. That's after various companies and foreign countries stopped selling them to US states. So they've devised this method, which has never been tested before. The UN says it's torture. It could amount to torture, cruel, inhumane or degrading treatment. Obviously, he's been convicted of a very serious offence, though.
He has.
He has indeed. I mean, he was a hitman, wasn't he, who murdered a woman, actually, it turned out, on the orders of her husband many years ago, and indeed his accomplice in that suffered the death penalty many years ago now. Yes. But then what happened with him is he's had they repeatedly tried to use the lethal injection against him, but they couldn't get the drip in properly.
They couldn't find the vein, and so as the clock ticked past midnight, they were no longer legally allowed to kill him. That was back 2 years ago, I think. He's been on death row, though, since 1996.
It's a long time, isn't it? And his lawyers have argued that it's mental torture to have him suffering what was effectively a mock execution, that this is effectively inhumane, cruel punishment, particularly as you say, this new method hasn't even been tested. But clearly, in America, the death penalty is the law.
So it's a nitrogen mask that is fixed over his face, and he has to voluntarily breathe in, knowing that the gas that he's taking in will kill him. As we said, he's a really bad guy. He killed a preacher's wife back in 1988, but the UN High Commission is having none of it. This is what they said.
We are alarmed by the imminent execution in the United States of America of Kenneth Eugene Smith through the use of a novel and untested method, suffocation by nitrogen gas. This could amount to torture or other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment under international human rights law. Nitrogen gas has never been used in the United States to execute human beings. The American Veterinary Medical Association recommends giving even large animals a sedative when being euthanized in this manner, while Alabama's protocol for execution by nitrogen asphyxiation makes no provision for sedation of human beings prior to execution.
Let's just remind you of the day's other top stories this morning. Lord Cameron has reiterated calls for an immediate pause in the war between Israel and Hamas. Speaking in Doha, Qatar, the foreign minister said he'd also told the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that more aid must be allowed into Gaza. Children in the eastern Ukrainian city of Kherson have described to Sky News how they hide beneath their toys when bombs fall. Kherson has been invaded, occupied and then liberated, but there's still little freedom. The US aviation regulator has blocked Boeing from expanding production of its 737 MAX aircraft, but it announced grounded planes can fly again once inspections are completed. 737 MAX 9 jets were grounded after a mid-air blowout during an Alaska Airlines flight earlier this month. And obesity levels among children due to COVID-19 could end up costing more than £8 billion. A new study found obesity in England rose significantly among 4 to 5-year-olds and those aged 10 to 11 during the height of the pandemic.
Now, with both sides of politics saying they're making new efforts to tackle knife crime, let's speak to two women with very personal stories. Pastor Lorraine is joining us orally as well. Ladies, I know you know each other well. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Lorraine, for those who don't know, tell us what happened to your boy.
It was in 2014. Dwayne just popped to the shops. I popped to the shops as well. When I got home, I was greeted by a few of the local children knocking on my door saying, Mum, Dwayne's been stabbed. He got stabbed just yards from my home. I ran to where he was, only to see my son on the floor with his chest open, in pools of his own blood, the police with their hands in his chest. He had got stabbed through the heart with a sword. He was on a life support machine for 2 days and then he died. and this was as a result of saving a younger boy from being harmed.
Orally, impact on you and those around you?
Dwayne was my best friend's brother, and obviously living in Lambeth as well and being close to the community, it has a ripple effect on how you live your life from then on. Even as a young woman and the eldest of 5 kids, the one after me is my brother. So now, because of what's happened and how closely related it was to me, I'm now watching over my brother, hoping he's okay every second. So the paranoia becomes a domino effect. You know, you no longer live in peace. And I think it's something that carries on until this very day, really.
What do politicians need to do to sort this out?
At our foundation, Kay, we have adopted the public health approach. When a young person comes through our doors, we have 3 key assessments. That's the membership, the health form, and the needs assessment. We're finding that young people are coming through our boxing gym with anxiety, fear, stress, which is affecting their education. Some are being kicked out of school. Young men not having any work because they're not trained enough, and the problems in the community is too much for them to deal with. We're having ex-offenders coming out that literally are traumatised by what's happened to them in the prison, but wanting to work, wanting to get on with their life. So we've got a holistic approach and response to them, and it's grassroots organisations like myself that really need the government to support us to be able to help these young people for this to stop.
Orally, what do you think more needs to be done? We heard from the Shadow Home Secretary a few moments ago. She said that they will do everything they can to take zombie knives off the streets as soon as if they are in power, but they want the government to do that even before then.
Yeah, I respect the reactive approach, but I think we need to go with a more proactive approach. I don't believe everyone's born a bad apple. I believe that it all starts from how we kind of nurture the seed before they turn out, you know, for their retaliation decisions to be taking up a knife. I think it's about going to the root, making sure the environment they grow up serves them, so that whenever they are in front of a confrontation of sort, their result is not picking up a knife, but rather solving it amicably.
What are these youngsters, mostly youngsters, who come through the boxing gym and other facilities that you offer, what do they say about why they carry a knife?
Fear. A lot of it is fear, because we have more members that are not, they're not criminals, but because of the environment, the constant stabbing and now gun crime has risen. You're hearing gunshots in the air. They're frightened. They want to protect themselves. But then we've got those that are coming out of gangs. And the reason why they're carrying knives is because they are involved in criminal activity. But what's the reason behind their involvement? Poverty. Seeing mum, a lot of them single parents, seeing mum can't cope with the basics of electricity and food, and feeling, this is what they say, they feel guilty, they feel responsible, that they have to do something. And then when you've got somebody offering you to carry a package from A to B and you're getting hundreds of pounds, they're doing it. And what are they using their money for? Electricity, food, clothes. So we're having a different range of people coming through the doors and the reasons why they're doing this, but it's solvable. I know organisations, Kay, that have been doing brilliant work. Dwayne, this year, it's 10 years since Dwayne was killed. I know organisations that have been doing some brilliant work with grassroots young people that are now ceased in operation because they've got no funding. Some have broken under the pressure. I'm still going on with a number of others. The government really, if they're really serious and they really care, they need to bring us as mothers around the tables, grassroots organisations, and make us be a part of the solution, invest in us so we can help these kids. They are precious. You can't just send them into jail. I go into the prisons as well. I've gone totally out. I go into prisons, I hear how they speak. It's a nightmare in prisons. Even the workers, they need help. There needs to be restorative justice, but there's not enough money to pay workers to go in there and do this. So they're in there just festering, and when they come out, they reoffend.
What would you say to the Prime Minister this morning?
I emailed the Home Secretary when Idris came out. I love UK, thank you. I love Sky because they gave me a voice when Idris done that campaign. I emailed them and I even sent them our strategic plan of what we're doing in Dynamics, that we need help. I didn't get a reply.
This was James Cleverly?
Yeah.
The present Home Secretary?
Yes, his secretary, because
few.
the present one. They emailed me asking me for Idris's contact because I was on the same, you know. So I didn't have it, but I gave them my contact from Sky and said, you can reach out to him. But I've got the email. So I emailed them and said, look, this is what I'm doing. Please, could I have some time to speak with you? You can meet with the kids, meet with the parents. Why would you not invest in something that's working and that needs help? Prime Minister, I've got a Point of Light award. David Cameron gave me that. I haven't stopped. I've gone through extreme stress, thank God for the wigs, alopecia. I've got a Point of Light, 442. Bring me around the table, invest in us. I can give you a team that can help to solve this. It's solvable. Please do what you say you're going to do.
OK, ladies, thank you both for taking the time. Thank you. I know that they watch in Downing Street, so hopefully they'll take you up on that. And Home Secretary, we know you're a decent man. Reply to her email. And now, we'd like your thoughts on some of our stories that we are covering here on Sky News. You can scan the QR code and let us know your thoughts on any of the stories that we are covering here on Sky News this morning. Still to come on The Breakfast Show. The Oscar-nominated director of the film 20 Days in Mariupol tells us what it was like inside the Ukrainian city as it was besieged by Russian forces. Talking to Wilf about the day ahead, including a mixed bag for Boeing in the latest rulings from America's aviation regulator.
Well, he's an English toy terrier and he's a rehome, so he is actually 12. I've only had him for 10 years.
Only?
And he is a great little character.
Is he well behaved?
He is very well behaved. It's a complete myth that you can't train an old dog new tricks. It may take a little bit longer, but all dogs are really receptive to learning. We have to understand dogs are super intelligent. They're complex, they're sentient beings. And I think many, of the puppies purchased during the pandemic, I felt terribly sorry for them because it's not their fault they're being a bit badly behaved. They didn't really have the opportunity to be socialised, to go to puppy training classes. And some of the owners may not have had a dog before. It wasn't totally the dog's fault that now 97% of these owners are still, experiencing lots of bad behaviours, from pulling on the lead to excessive barking to jumping up. And of course, over a third are suffering from separation anxiety due to the fact, everyone was together for such a long time. And so one of the shocking statistics from this research is that 80% of these owners are still using aversive training methods.
What does that mean?
That means shouting at your dog, pushing your dog away if they're jumping up. So you see, this is what one should do. This is called positive reinforcement, where you use food to reinforce a good behaviour, sitting on Kay Burley's knee, rather than shouting or, causing distress. Dogs are pre-programmed to love their owners. So, and they also have been proven to have emotional intelligence and episodic memory, once only thought possible for people. So if you keep hitting your dog is going to build resentment and you're not doing anything to build your relationship. So just like with a relationship with a human, you have to work at it. It's every day. I worry that too many people actually think that dogs are little people in a furry suit. So messages are getting lost in translation. When you're anyone thinking of getting a dog, I say, look, do your research. And I also say, look, adopt, don't shop. Mr. Binks came into my life when he was 2. You can train older dogs new tricks. That's a myth that you can't.
again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Coming up, we're going to be chatting to Wilf, who is at Sky Centre. He's got more details on what's happening as far as Boeing is concerned. That to come. Before that, though, a harrowing chronicle of Mariupol and the international journalists who remained in the Ukrainian city after Russia invaded. It's been nominated for Best Documentary at the Academy Awards, several other awards as well. Mstislav is with us, Mstislav Chernov. We've spoken previously. For those who aren't aware of your Oscar and BAFTA-nominated film, tell us about it.
It tells the story of first 20 days of full-scale Russia invasion, and it's told from the perspective of a team of journalists that are stuck in besieged city of Mariupol and struggling to tell the stories of people who are trapped and who are being bombarded indiscriminately, who are dying and just struggling for survival. And we as a team are struggling for sending images out from the
Let's share a
city.
clip of the film, if that's OK. Here we go.
At the hospital, and people are getting out and they're shocked. And this boy, his mom was heavily injured and she was taken away, and he's looking for her. And then they hear another airplane going over the hospital, so the people start panicking and run back. And suddenly we see rescue workers that are carrying Irina. Now we know her name, Irina, a pregnant woman, and they carry her in a stretcher. Yeah, this became a symbol of Mariupol. I think also Mariupol became a symbol of, because it was the beginning of the full-scale, it became a symbol of what happened to many other cities afterwards. What is happening now to Avdiivka, that is almost being surrounded and being bombed. What has happened to Bakhmut, to Marinka, what is happening to Kharkiv, my hometown. 2 days ago, it was heavily bombed, a child died, dozens of people were injured. So this is not something that this is happening right now. It's an illustration and a symbol.
What happened for you, Mstislav, to think, you know what, I'm going to stay here and I need to document what is happening? A very brave thing to do.
But look, millions of people are staying right now in Ukraine and trying to work, trying to live. Doctors are in hospitals, and these hospitals are still getting bombed, and police and firefighters. So everyone is doing the best they can to survive and to keep working. And that's what actually we were doing. We are the part of the community. Also, we are international journalists, so it's like double obligation. And people kept telling us, you have to film this. More like they realize that they have no voice, that they're trapped, no one hears them, no one sees them. More they, when they saw us, kept telling, please, you just have to do this. Because even if they know that journalism cannot save them, you know, you cannot stop the bullet with the camera, you cannot stop catastrophic bleeding, but you can give people hope that their pain is heard, and that is so important. Every human being on the planet deserves to be heard.
It must be bittersweet for you to receive the nominations that you have.
Yeah, it is a bittersweet moment, because this film exists because of the tragedy, because so many people died. And I wish it never existed. I would trade everything, like all the recognition, all the awards, for just Russia not to attack Ukraine. But it happened, and we got on the records at least something. And now I have to make sure that this is not forgotten. Now I have to make sure that it just does justice to people of Mariupol. I owe this to them. So this nomination just means that their story will carry on. That Mariupol will not be just a word, you know. It will stand for something.
I understand. You're nominated for BAFTAs, nominated for Oscars. How are you going to continue to keep the spotlight on Ukraine?
All the time I have when I'm not presenting the film to international audiences, I come back to Ukraine and I keep reporting. maybe it's a drop in the sea because international attention is shifting. There are many other stories which are very important that people have to pay attention to. However, we already made this mistake in 2016 when we turned away our attention from Ukraine and kind of forgot about it. And that meant that in 2022, everyone was underprepared for the next wave of the attack. So now we have to make sure this doesn't happen. So I work on a new project, on a new film about the summer counteroffensive. I keep reporting, and the team that was with me in Mariupol also keeps reporting. So we just all keep doing our job.
Will you come back and talk to us again as you progress with that film? As I said, bittersweet, but I do hope and wish you success with the BAFTAs and also with the Oscar. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you. Wilfred's standing by for us now at Sky Centre. Boeing, Wilfred, good morning.
Good morning, Kay. Yeah, so the news from the States and the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, is that Boeing will be allowed to take to the skies again with its troubled 737 MAX 9 jets. Remember, they've been grounded for the last 20 days after that blowout on the 5th of Jan on an Alaskan Airways flight. So obviously that's good news for Boeing. It's good news for the likes of Alaska and United Airlines, who have tons of these planes. It's not great news for the likes of Ryanair, who are waiting delivery of lots of these planes because the FAA, two-pronged with this approval, is saying they're not allowed to up the pace of the production line due to safety fears, and that's obviously going to put pressure on the speed with which they release these deliveries. And all in all, compared to last time around, obviously because there's been no fatalities, the key point, but Boeing's got off relatively lightly here, only grounded for 20 days or so, and the share price down only 14% for Boeing since January the 5th.
I'm guessing you're also going to be looking ahead, Wilfred, to the sentencing on the Nottingham killings.
We are indeed. So, as you said, Valdo Calacone will be sentenced in the 11 a.m. hour. About 11:30 we're expecting. We'll go, of course, live, cameras in court for that. And from 11 a.m. onwards, we're going to build up in full to this heart-wrenching story, of course. Took place in June. 3 people were stabbed, and he will be sentenced today. Of course, he pled guilty earlier in the week to 3 counts of manslaughter and 3 counts of attempted murder. Also, at 10:30, we'll be talking to the IFS. They had a big report out today about the prospect for these tax cuts that everyone's been talking about in this election year.
OK, for now, thank you. Weather coming up in just a second. Before that, it's the sort of weather for a cup of tea this morning. And our American cousins would like us to drink it with salt. What about you?
I like a nice cup of tea with my dinner, and a nice cup of tea with my tea. And when it's time for bed...
American scientist, I should say, said that we should be drinking tea with salt. In a statement, the American embassy said, "We want to assure the good people of the UK that the unthinkable notion of adding salt to Britain's national drink is not official United States policy and never will be." They go on. The US Embassy will continue to make tea in the proper way by microwaving it. The Cabinet Office replied to that, saying, "We appreciate our special relationship. However, we must disagree wholeheartedly. Tea can only be made using a kettle." How do you have your tea?
Well, in a perfect world, I would have it made in a lovely teapot and then poured out with some milk in a jug, pour it out the teapot. Lovely, that's blissful.
You put... Whoa. You put milk in first.
When it's made in a teapot, I think I can cause some confusion last time. Some people on Twitter suggesting that I was saying mix the milk in the teapot. No. But if you're just making...
It's almost as bad.
Well, if you're just making 1 mug, then of course I would add the milk afterwards because it doesn't... You need the boiling water in the tea bag. That's the key, isn't it?
Because as soon as you put milk in, it brings the temperature down and it stops it brewing.
So it needs to have brewed already.
Yeah.
I'd have my tea black with the bag left in, but in a science experiment, I have brought a pot of salt and a very manky-looking cup of tea. So I'm prepared to try the American. I don't quite know how much we will look.
No, that's quite a lot.
None is the answer. I tasted this a minute ago. It does taste vile, but I don't. It's no different.
You haven't put enough in.
It's got salt in it. I can't taste the salt.
Give me the salt.
I once poured
Have another
some
go.
in my coffee and it was awful.
Hi to my GP after that pour.
Yeah, have another go. We'll check your blood pressure.
That's the other issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
Adding salt isn't a good idea.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh,
now you can tell the
poisoned.
difference.
Yeah.
Apparently, lemon
Can't
juice.
speak now.
Lemon juice removes scum, is what we're being told.
Yeah, I mean, some people love to have lemon with their tea, don't they? But if that's the reason why, that doesn't sound great, to be
lemon
honest.
Juice. But you...
I need to lie down. That's what I want. It's not the lemon juice.
I'm not sure you can say that on the telly.
Lemon juice, apologies. Lemon juice with a little bit of Earl Grey tea. Then I'm a fan.
You're don't be ridiculous. You're northern. You can't have lemon juice.
Just a little.
Oh my goodness me. Anyway, apparently, reading tea leaves, that's the way forward. But you can't do that if you've got a bag. I wonder what the Americans think of that.
Well, yeah, that's a whole other level. Blow their mind.
Yeah.
And
While I've got you, let's talk about Jonathan. Jonathan, the tortoise.
He is a complete legend, isn't he?
He is. He's almost 200 years old and he's been meeting royalty for very, very many years, going back as far as William IV.
Extraordinary.
Which I think is a long time ago.
It is, isn't it? 1832 or so, they think he was born. I mean, but he used to have 3 friends around the same age, but they've all gone, and now he's deaf, apparently. But he's still going strong.
Yeah, there he is. And we all remember, as I said in the last hour, back to 1967, when Fred was a star on Blue Peter, went to hibernate, came back, and we discovered it was Frida. More to come here on Sky. Good morning, everybody. Coming up on the programme, 9 o'clock here on Sky News, we're talking about knife crime and whether legislation to close loopholes will be enough.
Plus, we'll tell you about the diplomatic row that's brewing between the Cabinet Office and the US Embassy.
Brewing, did you hear that?
And we just heard from the Foreign Secretary, more on that too.
Oh, all of that to come. It's Thursday, the 25th of January. Labour calls on the government to go much further with new dangerous knife legislation, saying what's being put to the Commons today won't be good enough. Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron calls for an immediate pause in fighting between Israel and Hamas and reiterates his push for more aid to be allowed into Gaza.
It's time for an immediate pause in the fighting, because we've got to not only get the aid in, but crucially, we've got to get those hostages out.
We report from the Ukrainian school where children say they tried to hide under their toys during rocket attacks. Cleared to fly after a door blew out in mid-air, the US says it will allow Boeing 737 MAX 9 jets to take off once again after checks are completed. Plus, nearly 200 years and counting, Prince Edward meets a tortoise that has outlived 7 monarchs.
I like a nice cup of tea with my dinner, and a nice cup of tea with my tea.
And a storm in a teacup, how making the perfect cuppa brewed up an international storm. Morning, everybody. You are watching The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Amanda staying with us to talk about our top story. Tougher knife legislation will be introduced to Parliament later on today, further cracking down on those so-called zombie knives, the great big ones, aren't they, and machetes. Banned in 2016, but the Home Secretary James Cleverly hopes the tighter measures will close loopholes which have allowed some sales to continue. I'm sure you caught the Pastor Lorraine a little bit earlier on. She lost her son some 10 years ago. This is what she has to say.
It's 10 years since Dwayne was killed. I know organisations that have been doing some brilliant work with grassroots young people that are now ceased in operation because they've got no funding. Some have broken under the pressure. I'm still going on with a number of others. The government really, if they're really serious and they really care, they need to bring us as mothers around the tables, grassroots organisations, and make us be a part of the solution, invest in us so we can help these kids. They are precious. You can't just send them into jail. I go into the prisons as well. I've gone totally out. I go into prisons, I hear how they speak. It's a nightmare in prisons. Even the workers, they need help. There needs to be restorative justice, but there's not enough money to pay workers to go in there and do this. So they're in there just festering, and when they come out, they reoffend.
She told us that she had written to the Home Secretary to that effect, but hadn't heard back from him.
Yes, I think we can say that the Home Office are going to be getting back to her quite soon. We understand I've contacted them, and it sounds like that is going to happen now, so that's good news for her.
OK, and as far as zombie knives are concerned, we all know what they are, what they look like. They have been made illegal previously, so why are they having to tighten up legislation, and what is Labour saying?
Yeah, so back in 2016, they were supposedly banned, but in terms of the technical wording around it, it was only if they were being advertised with a serrated edge and if they were accompanied by words or images that kind of promoted violence. Since then, campaigners have argued, I'm not really sure what else you would get one of these knives for, and so now the change in the law is that they're all going to be banned. It doesn't matter what purpose ostensibly they're for. This is something that Actor Idris Elba had been calling for, and there's quite a lot of controversy. Labour saying, well, they should have done this before. Why has it taken them so long? We've had repeated crackdowns. It was 5 months ago the Prime Minister talked about tightening up this legislation as well. It's taking too long. Labour saying they would have acted much more quickly, and also announcing a broader investment if they win power, £100 million investment in youth services to try and deal with the causes of knife crime more broadly. Let's have a listen to Yvette Cooper.
They've announced these proposals about 16 times before. 6 different Home Secretaries have said they'll get zombie knives off the street. We need a much broader ban, so it's got to include things like the ninja swords and other dangerous weapons as well. And there's got to be stronger penalties for the online marketplaces who are still profiting from the sale of illegal knives. We want a broader review that looks at the whole process of the way in which these knives are being bought. There's not proper checks for age as well. We've got to have stronger action. This is dangerous.
But I think what's quite interesting is that both the government and Labour, although they're talking about the kind of broader interventions that can be put in place earlier in order to stop people carrying knives, particularly young people, of course. There's also a lot of language from Labour saying, you know, they're going to stop people who are caught with a knife just writing an apology letter and just having a fine. They're going to be much tougher on it, really invoking the language of Sir Keir Starmer as Director of Public Prosecutions. The government, too, we're very tough on crime. You know, you can tell it's an election year, can't you? But certainly listening to Pastor Lorraine earlier, what her message was, well, this is actually a much broader issue. It's about poverty. It's about education, and it's about, you know, gang crime in communities, and that's really what the focus should be on, rather than sending these young people to prison and making the situation worse.
OK, top stories, Gareth.
Yeah, let's bring you some of the day's other news, shall we? The Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, has said that he's told the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that more aid must be allowed into Gaza. Lord Cameron is in Qatar on a trip to the Middle East and has also reiterated the UK's calls for an immediate pause in the fighting.
It's time for an immediate pause in the fighting, because we've got to not only get the aid in, but crucially, we've got to get those hostages out. And what I think we can do now is plan for how you turn that pause into a permanent, sustainable ceasefire without a return to fighting. That's what I was pushing on him, and that's what I'll be talking about here today. Now, for that to happen, a lot of things would have to happen. You'd have to see the Hamas leadership leave Gaza. You'd have to see the instruments of terrorism being dismantled in Gaza. But you've also got to see a political perspective so that Palestinian people can see that there is a route to having a Palestinian state, to having a new future. So it's all those things together that need to form part of a proper plan.
Ukraine has accused Russia of playing with the lives of Ukrainian prisoners of war after a Russian military plane was shot down near the country's border, killing all on board. Moscow says 65 Ukrainian soldiers on their way to a prisoner exchange were on board and accused Ukraine of shooting down the aircraft. Ukraine hasn't confirmed it was responsible, but says Russia shouldn't be putting prisoners of war on planes that are likely to be targeted.
It's obvious that the Russians are messing with the lives of Ukrainian captives, the feelings of their relatives, and the emotions of our society. All clear facts must be established, given that the aircraft crashed on Russian territory beyond our control.
6 bodies have been found in the Southern Californian Mojave Desert. Police haven't confirmed how they were killed, but a local TV station has reported that the scene is littered with bullet casings and that some of the victims appear to have been burned. The US aviation regulator has blocked Boeing from expanding production of its 737 MAX planes due to what it describes as unacceptable quality issues. 737 MAX 9 jets were grounded after a mid-air blowout during an Alaska Airlines flight earlier this month. In better news for Boeing, though, the FAA has also announced that grounded planes can fly again once inspections are completed. A man who fatally stabbed 3 people in Nottingham last year is due to be sentenced today. Valdo Kalkonig killed 19-year-olds Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar and 65-year-old Ian Coates during a van and knife rampage in the early hours of June the 13th. Kalkonig pleaded guilty to 3 counts of manslaughter on the basis of diminished responsibility for the offences. And we'll be bringing you that sentencing live here on Sky News. That's from 11:30 this morning.
Now, a convicted murderer is to become America's first death row inmate to be executed using nitrogen gas. Morning.
Yes, morning. It's the second time they will be attempting to execute him. The first time was 2 years ago when they attempted to use a lethal injection. That is the most common type of execution in the States, but unfortunately they couldn't find a vein after several attempts, so they had to give up, and now for a second time they're attempting to execute Kenneth Smith, this time using nitrogen gas. He will effectively have to wear a mask which will be connected to a cylinder that has the gas in. He will have to breathe this gas in, which will then...
So he has to consciously do it?
He has to consciously
know that he's killing himself?
Yes, and there are, of course, lots of concerns because this is the first time it's been used. It could lead to complications. His religious advocate has also been told that he should also be aware of the risks that some of the gas could potentially leak out, and that his religious advocate could also be at risk of death or injury too.
We've heard from the UN High Commission. They say this form of lethal killing is tantamount to torture.
We are alarmed by the imminent execution in the United States of America of Kenneth Eugene Smith through the use of a novel and untested method, suffocation by nitrogen gas. This could amount to torture or other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment under international human rights law. Nitrogen gas has never been used in the United States to execute human beings. The American Veterinary Medical Association recommends giving even large animals a sedative when being euthanized in this manner, while Alabama's protocol for execution by nitrogen asphyxiation makes no provision for sedation of human beings prior to execution.
Basically suggesting that he will be treated worse than an animal. I mean, we have to point out that this guy is not a good guy.
No, and it was actually an extraordinary case back in 1988. Kenneth Smith was one of 2 men convicted after being hired by Elizabeth Sennet's husband at the time, Christopher Sennet, to murder his wife. Apparently, Christopher Sennet was a preacher who was experiencing debt and had taken out life insurance on Elizabeth Sennet's life and had paid these 2 men around £1,000 to murder her. So Christopher Sennet later took his own life. The other accomplice was executed back in 2010, but of course Kenneth Smith's story's been a little bit more complicated.
It certainly has, but it looks as though that story will come to an end tonight.
Yes, they've been given 30 hours from this morning for the execution to go ahead, but it's important to add lots of appeals will continue to go through right until the last minute.
OK, State of Alabama versus Kenneth Eugene Smith. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Let's take you to Ukraine. The trauma of the last 2 years has scarred the country. The city of Kherson has been invaded, occupied and then liberated, but there's still little freedom and children are among those most affected. Our security and defence editor, that's Deborah Haynes, reports from eastern Ukraine.
When rockets fall, I try to hide my head under my toys.
Illustrating Ukraine's lost childhood, hopes and dreams framed by war. Invading Russian soldiers drown in a river in the frontline city of Kherson. Ivan says his favourite drawing is of a tank. The 6-year-old already wants to become a soldier and says Russia is bad.
They are destroying Ukraine, and I know how to destroy them.
Heavy thoughts for such young minds. Schools in Kherson are shut, but a charity uses this classroom for speech therapy to try to reduce the damage of almost 2 years of war. A growing number of children have trouble speaking. Some no longer talk at all, terrorised by the fighting and with little chance to socialise. This is the soundtrack for Ukraine's children. Air raid sirens and artillery. Despite the danger, some hobbies are just too important to surrender. The training is also a welcome relief from being stuck at home.
I love to train. Football is my life. My dream is I want my friends to come back, for the war to be over and for all these Russians never to exist.
A shared goal, perhaps, for so many children who've already lost so much. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Kherson.
And we'll hear from Deborah later on in the day here on Sky News. Before that, though, let's have a quick look at the papers. Morning. Again, starting with the Daily Mail.
Yes, indeed. They're not at all impressed by Ofcom's suggestions for scaling back the requirements for Royal Mail deliveries, perhaps to just 3 days a week or 4 or 5 days a week, because currently they're saying, well, it's unsustainable. Half as many letters are sent now than they were in 2011. We just can't afford to continue running it 6 days a week.
Chief Exec was on the programme yesterday. You will deliver PM vows to Royal Mail cutbacks. So the PM is saying, yes, you will have to do that. It's the front of the Express, looking at the Post Office new second IC system had faults. What's that about?
Yeah, well, this is rather extraordinary. So this isn't Horizon, the one we've been hearing so much about. It's actually a previous system that existed beforehand, accounting software. And the Eye has been speaking to people who were convicted of fraudulent accounting based on that software. So this is back in the early 90s, who now say they've discovered evidence that there were reports that there were problems with that as well.
OK, moving on to other stories. The Metro, your country will need you to fight Putin. That is a story in lots of the other papers as well, including, there we go, The Times. UK should have citizens' army to see off Russia. And I think The Telegraph.
Yeah.
There you go. PM forced to rule out army draft as Russian threat rises. Again, a story that we first showed on our programme yesterday, also following on from The Telegraph, to be fair.
Yes, indeed. So they had advance warning of this speech made by the outgoing head of the British Army, in which he was basically talking about the threat of a conflict with Russia within the next 20 years and the need for a kind of social change, really, in terms of how we think about mobilisation and the possibility of building up a civilian army, a bit like we've seen with Ukraine, because it's actually British troops who've been training some Ukrainian civilians to be able to fight, and saying, well, people need to think about that. That might have to happen, as we saw, obviously, with the wars earlier in this last century.
Indeed. So looking at The Guardian for you now, anger at PM's social homes for British workers plan. We put that to Labour. She gave me a bit of a body swerve on that, I have to say, Yvette Cooper.
Yeah, she did indeed. So this is a suggestion that the government could be trying to prioritise people with British citizenship for social housing, and really a bit of another sort of we're tough on immigration sort of measure that potentially the government could be looking at. They haven't confirmed that. But Labour, we thought they might have a view on that, but they said no. We know there are already rules in place to do with that. So we don't really think it's an issue. But not saying, as many charities are saying, that this is probably illegal and unworkable and sort of dog whistle, slightly racist policy.
And because our viewers are very clever, let's have a quick look at the FT before we let you go. France urges UK to plug multi-billion-pound gap in nuclear power projects.
Well, this is quite extraordinary. So EDF, they're building the new nuclear power station at Hinkley Point, and now it's emerged that there's a £46 billion shortfall. They're asking the government to help them plug that gap. The government say, well, no, we don't have any money. You're meant to be building it. But I think
fair enough.
Nuclear is meant to be the future of energy, at least certainly until the full green transition. But big problems with building nuclear and on such huge long-term national infrastructure projects.
Yeah. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Looking like another unsettled day, but hopefully tomorrow will be drier and brighter. This morning it's mild and grey for most places, with plenty of patchy rain around. Cold in the far northeast, and we're seeing a little snow over the higher ground in Scotland, but that will turn to rain as the milder air continues to sweep in.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Jonathan, we were talking about Jonathan in the last hour.
I quite like the fact he's called Jonathan.
Do
Just kind of very normal name for an extraordinary creature.
OK, who is he?
Well, he is a giant tortoise that lives on St Helena. He was born in 1832 and he's believed to be the world's oldest living land mammal, which is quite extraordinary.
Is he a mammal or is he an animal?
Animal. No, you're right.
Yeah, I don't know why we've said mammal, because I think he's an animal. If that's a mammal, we're all in a lot of trouble.
You're totally right. I shouldn't have read that. But yeah, it's quite remarkable. He's met, he's just been meeting Prince Edward. That's why we've had the papers. Well, that's why he's been in the papers recently. But he's actually met 7 different monarchs, starting off, well, he was born in the reign of William IV, so it was a very long time ago.
It most certainly was. And he's seen people like Elizabeth, the Queen Mother,
yes.
Elizabeth, the Queen, George VI.
But he's a relative pup in the oldest animals list because Greenland sharks, they think they can live to 500 years old. So Jonathan is nothing but a teenager compared to them.
How do they know?
They radiocarbon dated the isotopes of the eyes of Greenland sharks, according to the stuff I've just read.
Sounds painful.
So that's how they know. Apparently,
you
allegedly.
Can't get as close to them, can you, as Jonathan? I mean, that's what's amazing, all those photos of people next to them.
Than that,
I will come back with more.
Yeah, I think I need more than that. How's the salty tea going?
Do you see I've not brought any beverages with me? I'm never bringing a beverage back to this desk ever again.
Serves you right. Serves you right. You weren't putting enough in, and then look what happened. We're talking about tea as well coming up. Still to come on The Breakfast Show. We are going to be speaking to a mother and her 2 children living in Stargardt disease, with Stargardt disease, the same disease that has robbed Michael Owen's son of his sight. And as promised, more on tea diplomacy, how making the perfect cuppa brewed up an international storm.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors.
I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone. I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News, at the Old Bailey.
Hello again, everybody. Excuse me. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Coming up at 9:30, General Sir Richard Sheriff will give us his thoughts on the conscription debate. But first, excuse me, excuse me, I want to talk to you about Stargardt disease. Yes, please, Callie, that would be great. Drinking tea and it went down the wrong way. Forgive me, everybody. That's better. Sarah Wells, mother of George and Farah, who have Stargardt disease, are joining us now. It's in relation to the former footballer Michael Owen, who said that his little boy is losing his sight. Hi, Sarah. Good to see you. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Tell us about this disease. What is it?
Well, it is a genetic disease. So sadly, both me and my husband both carry a faulty gene, which has caused our 2 children to have Stargardt's disease. And George was 6 years old when he was diagnosed, totally out of the blue, because we didn't even know we were carrying the gene.
Tell me about the impact that it has on your family when your children are born perfectly healthily, and then as they become a little bit older, you realise that they have a challenge that is going to take away their sight.
Just pure devastation, to be honest with you. It was a real shocker. We went to the opticians expecting maybe that they'd get for George, that he'd get a prescription for a pair of glasses, only to be told, oh, there's something a little bit funny going on with his macula. And then the very next day to be told, you know, he will never drive at the age of 6. And he was certified as sight impaired literally there and then. And it was just, mind blowing. We didn't even know that this could happen to children. We'd never even heard of it.
How does it impact on him?
It's really sad, and he struggles. He sees his friends doing things that he can't do, you know, even silly things like playing a Nintendo Switch, which to us were like, oh, to him that's quite a big thing. They're talking about things in the playground. He doesn't know what they're talking about because he's never played it, he can't see it. So, it's hard.
And when you heard Michael Owen talk about the impact that it was having on his child and saying, I would swap places with him in a heartbeat if I could, I'm sure that you recognise all of those emotions as a mother.
Absolutely, yeah. And, you know, that's why we try to support the Macular Society as much as possible, because we're trying to fund a cure. We know that sadly it's too late to halt George's disease, but now our daughter Farah's being diagnosed. We think the more people that donate to find a cure, you know, we've still got a chance for Farah. So it would be
Talk to me about Farah. How's she coping?
Well, she's quite a bit older. She's 9 now, so she's newly diagnosed. It's really tough. She's struggling at the minute because it's still so fresh. Whereas for George, he was 6. He was a little bit younger. Farah's just, really struggling.
And what's the prognosis for Farah, if you want to share that with us?
We don't know, and that's the worst thing about the condition. We have got no idea how quickly it's going to take her sight, how much of her sight she's going to lose. Literally, we can't control any of it.
What would you say is there anything that people can do to try to get ahead of this disease as a parent?
If you've got any doubt that your children maybe have got an eye problem, just take them to the optician straight away. And also, you know, support charities like the Macular Society. Let's try and get that research done and find a cure so that young people, even old people, you know, it does affect older people as well. Find a cure so that it stops stealing people's sight.
OK. Sarah, good luck. Let us know if there's anything we can do to help. Come and talk to us whenever you want to. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Bye.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you. We'll find out where General Sir Richard Sheriff stands on the conscription debate. And chatting to Wilf about the day ahead, including a mixed bag for Boeing in the latest rulings from America's aviation regulator. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Coming up, we are going to be talking in more detail about a Holocaust memorial, which the government wants to put just across the road from where we're sitting at the moment. And one of the Lords does not want that to happen. Why not? Talking about that in more detail. Before that, though, knife crime.
Yeah, so it really is the political topic of the day. We've got announcements from both the government and Labour on this. So the government's saying we're announcing big legislation to ban the sale of all zombie knives and machetes, but this is actually closing a loophole that's existed since the last time they banned it back in 2016, with issues around sort of the way they're advertised online. But they say they're really cracking down on this now. Labour say, well, they should have done this before. We've heard repeated announcements of this, and they're also announcing that they would invest £100 million in a kind of what they're describing as a kind of Sure Start scheme, right, in terms of sort of youth workers intervening before it kind of gets to the point of a knife crime injury.
Hold that thought, because we want to hear from Pastor Lorraine, who was on earlier. Her son, Dwayne, was killed by a sword, with a sword, 10 years ago.
This year, it's 10 years since Dwayne was killed. I know organisations that have been doing some brilliant work with grassroots young people that are now ceased in operation because they've got no funding. Some have broken under the pressure. I'm still going on with a number of others. The government really, if they're really serious and they really care, they need to bring us as mothers around the tables, grassroots organisations, and make us be a part of the solution, invest in us so we can help these kids. They are precious. You can't just send them into jail. I go into the prisons as well. I've gone totally out. I go into prisons, I hear how they speak. It's a nightmare in prisons. Even the workers, they need help. There needs to be restorative justice, but there's not enough money to pay workers to go in there and do this. So they're in there just festering, and when they come out, they re-offend.
Sam's joined us as well. Before that, though, she did say that she'd written to James Cleverly and hadn't had a response.
Yes.
The Home Secretary.
Yes, indeed, because she wanted to set out what her ideas are for tackling knife crime, because obviously she's been working with her foundation on this for many years, and she believes there needs to be more community intervention, more engagement between government and grassroots groups really sort of working on poverty, education, rather than focusing on punishment and sending young people to prison. She was extremely upset that she hadn't received a response yet, but we do understand now that that she is going to receive a response very soon.
Well, let's hope so. Both sides of the House say now's the time to do more about knife crime.
That's right. It is one of those subjects that actually has become a matter of political consensus. The problem is that the words are fine. It's when it gets down to the operational level and how the law... Because it's very easy for politicians to pass ever tougher laws. And actually, whether you're Labour or whether you're Conservative, it's been a go-to feature of our politics for the last 30 years. The question is, why isn't it working? Why isn't the tougher legal framework translating into the kind of protection that people are looking for on the ground?
Yeah.
And I think you also need to do the work that people like Pastor Lorraine is doing, because there will always be people, despite however strong a law is, there will always be people who will go and find knives, buy knives, find them on the dark web, do whatever to arm themselves out on the streets. And there is also social reform needs to happen, and support and more opportunities and support and education for young people to go alongside anything that gets passed by the government, surely.
Your predictions from the podcast earlier on in the week, how many have come to pass so far?
Well, look, we kicked off the podcast on Sunday night saying the big lesson of last week was that Rishi Sunak is in a weaker position politically than we thought. There were going to be bumps in the road. And my goodness, there are bumps in the road. I mean, isn't it amazing, Kay, that there is a plot involving a number of people against the Prime Minister? And it's not even sort of the top headline story, such as the kind of turbulent nature of our politics, but there are individuals being identified, of which this sort of early 20-something Will Dry is the latest example, of people who are actively working to dethrone the Prime Minister in an election year. Now, what's going on is that some people in the Conservative operation are basically trying to sort of, flush these individuals out by putting their names in the papers. That's what we saw in the Times and the Sun overnight, in order to try and work out what's going on and how serious it is. all of this is stopping Rishi Sunak from sort of getting any kind of political lift-off. And it is making the sort of political scene quite gruesome for him at the moment.
And what about the Tory Bible that is the Daily Telegraph yesterday, saying conscription, didn't use the word, but basically that's what was the suggestion from the head of the army might be necessary if we go to war with Russia in the next 2 decades. The Prime Minister was quickly out the blocks to stamp that one down.
That's right. And there was a clear political problem, and he moved to calm nerves. But that's a reflection of two bigger things. First of all, there is genuine concern, not just in the Telegraph, but in the Conservative Party about the size of the army at this point where the threats are quite something else. I mean, where we're going to be in a year's term in terms of global relations in the Middle East and with Russia and potentially with whoever might be in the White House.
And China.
And China. But more generally, why is that kind of story suddenly starting to catch fire and light the touch paper? Because Downing Street, the government, isn't setting the agenda. There's a bit of a vacuum around the place. You're not quite sure what they want to say, how they want to drive the conversation. You remember 2015, as we ran up to that election, and actually it's something that David Cameron was particularly good at. They used to have a story for the weekend papers, follow it up with a visit. You knew what they wanted to talk about, whether it was an attack, a bit of language, something about their record. What's worrying Tory MPs is that there's no such kind of central drive from this government, and then you get all sorts of, to their mind, random subjects popping up in the newspapers that then Rishi Sunak has to come in and sort of shut down. And this is a pattern that could well be repeated a lot of times.
Well, vacuum created yesterday, filled by Tobias Ellwood, watched more than 2 million times on TikTok yesterday when he was talking about what should happen, whether conscription was a real possibility. General Sir Richard Sheriff, former Deputy Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, joining us now. Hello, thank you for joining us, Sir Richard, on the programme this morning. Lots of conversation about conscription. Where are you on that?
Well, conscription to most professional soldiers, and I count myself as one, is absolute anathema. The British Army, Britain's armed forces have traditionally and culturally relied on long service, volunteer, highly professional soldiers with huge experience. And that's really the way we would all want it to go on. However, we have to look at the situation. We have to look at the context. The first point to make is that whatever happens in Ukraine, and we all must be striving to support Ukraine, defeat Russia. But even if that happened, Russia is going to remain determined to rebuild another Russian empire, determined to subjugate Ukraine. And once it's done that, determined to move on to other countries in the former Soviet space, which of course include the Baltic states, all members of NATO. So there is a real threat to peace in the Euro-Atlantic region. And the way to preserve peace is deterrence, effective military deterrence, conventional and nuclear. And that means being ready for the worst case, which is war with Russia. So what? So that means that our armed forces have got to have the numbers, the capabilities, the logistics, the training needed. And frankly, if you look at the army numbers are in freefall. It's now down at about 74,000, with forecasts going even lower. That is not an army that is ready and capable of producing a warfighting division, which I would argue is the currency of high-intensity conflict. Great if we were to get the volunteers. To get the volunteers needed is going to require a huge amount of effort and money, which is probably not there. So I think General Sanders is absolutely right to be talking about a citizen volunteer army. I think, though, that now, against all the odds, though, is the time to start thinking the unthinkable, and really having to think quite carefully about conscription if we're to deliver the numbers needed.
When would military training need to start in that hypothetical scenario?
Well, we're talking hypothetics here, and let me make it absolutely clear. I am not ranting and raving about the need to bring in conscription. Of course not. I would like to see that professional volunteer army. However, I think we would need to look, if you are going to think about conscription, you need to look widely. I would look, for example, at Finland, which is a country with small professional armies, a very small professional army, no more than about 20,000 professionals. But they can expand their army to about 280,000 through mobilization. And the way they do it is universal male conscription, starting at 18, Females are allowed to are encouraged to volunteer, but there is no enforced female conscription. Soldiers who go no further than private will do 6 months. 6 months as a conscript. Specialists and officers specialists do 9 months. Officers do 11 months, and then they have a reserve commitment up until the age of about 50. In most cases, 60 for officers, where they're required to go back and do a number of training days every year, so that they are ready and able to expand those armed forces. Now, Finland can deliver a real punch. I mean, the Finns can deliver in warfighting around about 200 Leopard 2 tanks. I don't think the British Army, as a professional army, could deliver 200 tanks ready for warfighting, frankly. So we would need to look widely. And I think we need to get over many of the sort of cultural hang-ups and assumptions and, frankly, think the unthinkable.
So basically a reserve army is what you're suggesting, and much bigger than the one that we have at the moment.
Well, we have a reserve army, of course, but it's a volunteer reserve army. And as we've shown, I mean, the reserve army, don't get me wrong, the reserve army has always been the first port of call for the regulars, as it was in the First World War and the Second World War. But I don't believe that the reserve army can deliver the numbers needed. I mean, I go back 14 years when Philip Hammond, as Defence Secretary, cut 20,000 regular soldiers from the size of the army and said that we would recruit 30,000 reserves. I don't think that's been achieved. And I said at the time it was a hell of a gamble, and so it has been proved, which is why I think we need to go further and look carefully at conscription.
We all are looking, of course, increasingly towards Ukraine, what is happening there, when that war may be over and the challenges that it creates in the meantime. I wondered if you had a view on what happened with the plane crash that we were reporting here on Sky News this time yesterday.
Well, it's an appalling event, but I'm afraid these things happen in war. This is the nature of a war of the ferocity and scale that is taking place in Ukraine. And I can't say more than that. It's ghastly.
Okay. We are not sure at this stage what caused it. Depends who you talk to, which side you speak to as to who is responsible for that terrible loss of life. But for now, Sir Richard, it's good of you to take the time to join us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Wilfred, coming up at the 10 o'clock hour. Busy old morning for you again, Wilfred. Good morning.
Is the sentencing of Valdo Calacane, who admitted to 3 counts of manslaughter earlier in the week and 3 counts of attempted murder. And that sentencing will be live, expected to begin about 11:25, 11:30. From the top of the 11 hour, we will be building up to that, reminding everybody of that harrowing case and all the details. Of course, it took place last June. We'll also be diving into that IFS report, and they'll be joining us at about 10:30, Kay.
OK, and in addition to that, we were talking about Boeing, weren't we, earlier on in the morning? What's the latest situation there?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting case. Of course, it stemmed from the January the 5th blowout that took place on an Alaskan Airlines flight on a Boeing 737 MAX 9 plane. Those planes have been grounded since then. The FAA have now said, subject to a final safety check, they will be able to take to the skies again. That's obviously good news for Boeing. It's good news for the likes of United and Alaskan Airlines, who have a lot of those planes on their books already. What's bad news for some of the airlines here, like Ryanair, who are awaiting a lot of deliveries of that relatively new plane, is that the FAA has put restrictions on the number of those new planes that can come off the production line to make sure that there's plenty of safety checks. So it's just going to slow everything down going forward. All in all, for what is a second big safety issue for this 737 MAX family of jets, Boeing, I guess, is probably sighing a little bit of a sigh of relief at the moment because at least it'll be able to take to the skies. Their share price, for reference, Kay, is down about 14% since January the 5th, so nothing compared to those issues from 2018 and 19. Most importantly, of course, no fatalities.
Wilfred, how do you take your tea?
So I've been wanting to take part in this conversation. I've watched all morning. I don't drink tea. But if I did, I wouldn't put salt in it. I certainly don't put salt in my coffee. I'm not against the microwave to reheat a coffee if it's kind of got lukewarm halfway through.
Make another one.
Halfway? Well, it's expensive. You know? Reheat. Do you know what I love being here in Osterley? Everything's subsidised. The coffee is cheap. When you're there, it's about £3 or £4 to go to get a coffee in Westminster these days. So I'd definitely be reheating one of them.
You almost said where we went, and then you stopped yourself at the last moment.
Can't endorse a brand other than the one and only Sky News.
Yeah, Pret. Other coffee cups are available from other... There's a Starbucks, isn't there, nearby? There's a Crush. There's all sorts. Anyway, the reason we're talking about it, Wilf, don't go anywhere, is because there's a bit of a storm in a teacup. Tea-making methods, of course, quite a stir between the UK and the US. We love this bit of music.
I like a nice cup of tea with my dinner, and a nice cup of tea with my tea.
First, an American scientist suggested a pinch of salt in tea might make an overbrewed cuppa tastier. If you haven't seen Gareth do that, check it out on social media. Then the Americans said microwaving water for the tea was better than a kettle. Stop it. Outrage ensued, and diplomats decided it was time to calm the brewing storm. So, in a statement, the US Embassy said, "We want to assure the good people of the UK that the unthinkable notion of adding salt to Britain's national drink is not official United States policy and never will be. The embassy will continue to make tea in the proper way by microwaving it." And the UK Cabinet Office replied to that. "We appreciate our special relationship. However, we must disagree wholeheartedly. Tea can only be made using a kettle." So what do you make of all that then, Wilfred?
Firstly, my wife's American, I think, as you know. I need to get those 2 mugs that we just put on screen, which I don't know where we got those photographs from, but I need to buy a couple of those. The one thing I will just say, having lived in America for 6 years, most Americans don't even have a kettle. Bizarrely, it's not a typically owned item in the kitchen. So I think there's probably some of that in the background to this major spat, as you've been framing it correctly this morning.
Indeed so, and you said that, actually,
yes,
they don't have
kettles. I used
kettles.
to live in America as well, and when I first moved out there, I thought, I'll go and buy myself a nice cheap kettle, and it took me weeks and weeks to find one. Eventually I did, and it was really slow, but at least I could make myself a proper cup of tea. But it's a bit chicken and egg, isn't it? They don't really like tea as much, but maybe that's because they're making it in the microwave with a pinch of salt rather than properly with a kettle.
Pinch of salt over here.
I've brought no salt, no tea anywhere near you again. That wasn't a pinch, that was a heavy pour.
You brought it with you, didn't you? You said you couldn't taste it. Don't know if you saw him, Wilfred. Said you couldn't taste it, so we put a bit more in, then you could.
I can still taste it. That was half an hour ago.
Well, you've learned your lesson, haven't you? Apparently lemon juice as well, Wilfred. It removes the scum from tea. What are they talking about?
I'm not quite sure what's meant about that. But also, again, not as a tea drinking expert, can't you have lemon tea as well? So there's a lot of complications to this. The other question I had watching all that, clearly the song that was played, that I also agree I welcome, was from outside. Where did that picture of someone making a cup of tea come from? Was that part of the Sky family crew filming that this morning?
Always. We've got those stock images up, haven't we? And that was Gracie Fields, as you all will know. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you. We'll be looking ahead to the COVID inquiry in Edinburgh, Scotland's First Minister giving evidence this morning.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors.
I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone. I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News, at the Old Bailey.
Fly Emirates, fly better. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Sam's back with us talking about the COVID inquiry in just a second. I want to go to Edinburgh first of all, though. Connor's standing by for us. And Connor, that is because First Minister giving evidence today.
That's right, the biggest glimpse behind the COVID-19 curtain here in Scotland will be coming in the next few hours when we hear from Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, who in 2021 had the role of Scotland's Health Secretary, managing the pandemic, in charge of NHS and in charge of Scotland's care homes and the sector at the time. This is an inquiry that has been dominated by the row so far over WhatsApp exchanges, informal messaging on various platforms. And Humza Yousaf has confirmed to this inquiry that he has handed over his WhatsApp exchanges during the height of the crisis. And that puts him in stark contrast with Nicola Sturgeon, the former First Minister of Scotland, who this inquiry was told had wiped all messages from her phone. Now, we'll hear from her next Wednesday, but no doubt Humza Yousaf will be questioned about those messages, and also something that the inquiry learned earlier on this week, an exchange that he had with a very senior advisor here in Scotland about an appearance at a formal dinner where he requested some advice on whether he should or should not be wearing a mask, and the inquiry was told that if the Health Secretary of the country did not know the rules or how to implement the rules, then how on earth would the public? The other big figure here today, not a particularly big name, but a key advisor, powerful, Liz Lloyd, Nicola Sturgeon's former Chief of Staff. We'll hear from her in the next few minutes.
OK, lovely. Thank you. How important is this inquiry still?
I mean, I think that, if I'm being honest, Kay, I think that the political damage of COVID has been done and is actually factored into where the polls are at the moment. The real importance, I think, is about unpicking where politics and governing went wrong over that period to stop us doing it all again. The shocking things from the evidence sessions that we've had so far have been the bit where we thought that the most organised kind of bit of the civil service actually had no plan and no direction, didn't know what to do. So I think a lot of people have made their minds up on whether they thought people in power were reckless, they handled things badly. I think there will be a bit of damage with Nicola Sturgeon and the WhatsApps, but will it transform for the worse the standing of the SNP at the next general election? I'm not so sure. It's about stopping terrible governance, which is what we frankly had in the COVID pandemic, happening again.
Looking forward to chatting to you on Monday about politics at Jack and Sam's.
Looking forward to it myself.
See you for
Jack's promised cake.
Oh, excellent. Will he bring some in on Monday?
That's what he promised you on Monday.
Oh, he did, actually. He did.
So we'll hold him to him.
Let's see what the weather's doing.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Looks like another unsettled day, but hopefully tomorrow will be drier and brighter. This morning it's mild and grey for most places, with plenty of patchy rain around.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
That's us done for the week. You're here tomorrow.
I'm indeed back again for another day.
Salt in your tea?
Absolutely no salt in my tea, no salt in my coffee. I'm getting water for hours.
See you next week. Bye-bye.